Hello class, this is Dr. Delmar. How are you? What an exciting time. We are about to start wrapping up week 4 here shortly. Super exciting for you, I'm sure, because this is one more class on that journey, on that pathway forward to your next steps. Hopefully it's not too much of a stressful time. I know that sometimes week 4 can signal, that time where you're like, oh my gosh, I have so much to do. And that's okay too, because with all of that work and effort, there's lots of positives that will come from that. This is an opportunity for you to really reflect and think about what's working well for you, especially when it comes to those organizational strategies you might employ to complete your work. Every day is an opportunity. In this class, we're not only strengthening our content for how American government and the Constitution works, but we're also deepening our critical thinking skills. You're really refining those abilities to be thoughtful and speak with an informed opinion and perspective. And I hope that you see that this is helping you to be a critical thinker, or to refine those skills, strengthen those, because we want people in our workplace, we want people in our society who have the ability to navigate with an educated perspective. And this certainly does that. Hopefully you're able to see those skills and how they transfer. So no matter what the topic you're researching or you're doing some critical analysis on, every opportunity to practice that, just like writing, is helpful. And just like we're practicing writing as a communication technique, when you practice and you refine your writing, it's also going to help you with your verbal communication as well. And so I am hopeful, again, that you'll be able to see the transfer of skills. For week 4, we're going to do a couple of things. First, we're going to look at the Electoral College. It might be clear as mud, especially if you're just looking at the words on paper when you're reading your textbook and working through the activities. I think visuals really help. They help me anyway. And so I'm going to give you some visuals, and I really want to make some connections along the way. Hopefully you see those connections to local implications and also to voter turnout. And then how this impacts us as far as in everyday life when it comes down to laws and the legal implications. So the Electoral College is, in its heart, it's about how we're represented. However, there's a lot of connections through the second and third order impacts as well. So hopefully you'll see those as I go through. And then there's going to be an activity, and I'll go ahead and start talking about the activity at the end of this video. And that activity is going to help you circle back to something that you identified for yourself in week 3. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and jump right in. And so this is, again, the Electoral College Explained. Now, I know that this is in your text, and so I'm not going to over-explain. I'm really going to concentrate on the visuals, but I will invite you to pause this video at opportunities so that you can really do some deep thought and processing. And let me move my face over here. We'll just go ahead and reveal all of this, okay? And so the basics, again, you've been studying this in your text. The basics here is essentially that this is a group of people that is representing you when we cast ballots at the federal level. And so each state has them, and each state has what we call electors, and each elector gets 2 votes. There's one for president and one for vice president. And the number of electors each state's received is based on the number of members each state has in Congress. And so I know there's been a lot of things out in the media about redistricting and gerrymandering and things of that nature. So this might not have a direct impact with that, but it is important for you to know that the number of members each state has in Congress directly impacts the Electoral College. And then, as you know, obviously you vote in November every 4 years for president, and then the electors, they take those votes from the state to guide who they're then going to vote for. And you can see here, for example, the example from Ohio in our last presidential election. And they actually have a meeting. So the actual meeting is in the state capitals the Monday after every second Wednesday in December after the November election. That's when they officially cast their ballots for president and vice president. So I want to give you a visual. I mentioned that, right? I mentioned that this is really not about the notes per se, but about those visuals. So I just want to give this to you. A lot of times you might see this thrown up on the news, maybe during the election cycle, but I think it's helpful for you to be able to pause this video and maybe find your state and others and really go through and look at some comparisons. And so obviously, you know, many of you are in California and there's a stark difference between that and other states. So I want to pause for a minute and give you an opportunity to pause the video and do some comparison and just kind of crosswalk and look at some of the numbers of the electoral or the elector votes. And typically red represents Republican and blue represents Democrats. And so you can just kind of see how the electoral college is set up there. So I'm just giving you a minute to pause. If you have the video still going, feel free to do that. Okay, so hopefully you've brought your attention to the number of electors that each state has currently, and then also looking at the trends as far as in Republican and Democrat. Okay, so how did we get here? Some of you might ask yourself that every day. How did we actually get to where we are? But what we're talking about here is why the electoral college. Okay, so why do we have this and why do they call it a college? So I'll give you a little bit of the history here. Essentially, this group of what they call educated individuals, right, as a college, and the framers needed a group of individuals who could make an educated selection for president. So people who knew what would make a good president. So it wasn't that the population was uneducated, it's just that they're easily uninformed or not informed. So obviously this is, before the time of the internet and TV. So in some of our discussion board posts, we've spoken about the need to possibly consider updating things. I've asked what your opinion is. Should we have more modern amendments to the Constitution to reflect the day and age that we live in? What's your thoughts on that? So you go back and look at the time period for which in the Constitution and the fundamentals of American government was formed, such a different time that we live in today. So before we even talk about changes, then we have to really understand where we came from. So this again gives you a little bit of that history. And I'm speaking a little bit slower so you have time to pause. And if you don't remember some of this from your reading in McGraw, then you can read through this information. Some of you may have heard this before. George Washington really counseled America to not allow political parties. And you can see political parties really kind of symbolize the fragmentation of our society to a very deep degree, and even back then that was an issue. And so the original plan obviously worked with the Electoral College until we had the rise of these political parties. So that wasn't the way it was intended to be originally. And you can see that essentially it ended up with a tie, right? Everybody was voting for their political party. And so the election of 1800 symbolizes a shift. Sorry, I'm trying to move my face around and unhide these points for you. And so essentially the result of the 1800 election was a tie, because you had the same equal amount of people voting for each Jefferson and Burr. And so the original Constitution had a flaw and a change was needed. So, I know sometimes people are like, I don't know about making changes. That seems scary and it's like a modern time. what happens if we open Pandora's box to change. But even back in 1800, the founders recognized that we needed to make some quick adjustments because the Constitution, especially with the formation of political parties, ended up not giving us a way forward other than this tie. So even back in the 1800s, we, as a society, our founders realized, we need to go back and adjust some things. So that's where you got the 12th Amendment. So each elector still has their to vote, but now they have to specify who they vote for, and essentially they name in their ballots the person that they're voted for as president and the person that they're voting for as vice president, and that's when it became split, right? So that it's not like I'm just voting for this person in general and then we'll decide who gets to be president, who gets to be vice president. So it's not like, I just get to run and in general I get to figure out, am I going to be the president or the vice president? No, there has to be some differentiation and discernment between that. And so that was when they really changed the process for electing both the president and the vice president, requiring those electors to cast separate ballots for each one. And that allowed us to prevent the tie. So in summary, you have three things that kind of led to where we are currently today. You had the rise of political parties, which we see full front and center today. You can't go anywhere without getting knocked over the head with it. The election of 1800, and then the 12th Amendment. So this is a little bit the lay of the land as far as in how we have it today. So I'll give you a minute to pause and look at this, and you kind of look at for example, how Texas is and how they have a certain members of the House of Representatives, plus every state has 2 senators. We know that, right? We know every state has 2 senators. And so the bigger the population of the state, the more people you have, which equals the number of House of Representatives people that you have, and that plus your 2 senators gives you your electors. And then the electors vote according to the popular vote of the state, with 2 exceptions, as you see noted there. So the popular vote means the individual vote, right? So just say, I don't know, a state has 3 million people. If 2.5 million people voted for one way and 500,000 voted another way, the electors follow the will of the people, which is the popular vote. Of course, we don't have anywhere close to 100% turnout, but I'm just saying that that's a hypothetical number. So whoever the most amount of the people vote for, that's who the electors vote for. But even with the adjustments that was made back in 1800s, and even though we've been using that for a very long time now, there's still some flaws in the Electoral College. And some of those have come to the surface in very recent years. So I'll give you just a minute to look over this. And so here's the issue. So if you had the majority of California vote for a person, then the electors would go and then vote for that person. However, when you look at the way the electors are distributed from state to state to state, once you start adding up the total of the popular vote, there is mathematically a way that all the popular vote does not equal who comes out with the win based on the electors' vote. So in other words, electors are not required to vote according to popular vote in some states. The law, that's never happened. But the election might have to be decided by the House of Representatives if that were to happen. But there is mathematically the issue that if you take all the popular vote in each state and then the electors vote for that person, but each state has a different amount of electors. And so mathematically it's possible that a person could win more electors but not the popular vote, and that has happened a couple of times. And so there are some proposed reforms with issues. I don't know that anyone's come up with a possible reform that doesn't have some cons or barriers to it. So right now we're left with what we have currently, and I guess it'll be interesting to see if in our lifetime if there's any further adjustments that could be made. You'll see the district plan there is laid out. I'll give you a minute to read through that and then the potential problems from that. And then you see here I'm ending. I don't know if you saw that last little click I just made, but this could increase the effects of gerrymandering, which is clearly we're having an issue with that right now. It's in the news everywhere. You can't go anywhere without seeing the issues with gerrymandering, especially with the new Supreme Court ruling. So if you're not up to speed on that, I do encourage you to just get like a hot wash, like a quick elevator speech. You can even get AI to give you one to help break down for you why that voting right or the Voting Rights Act that was overturned by the Supreme Court recently impacts gerrymandering. And there's another proposal called the proportional plan. So I'll kind of unveil this for you. Again, I don't know that there's been any plan or adjustments proposed that would not have a potential problem, but this is just another way that we could potentially see voting work in the future. And obviously through this proportional plan, you see that would increase the odds that the election will be sent to the House of Representatives. And I don't know about you, but that seems a little hairy. We've never sent an election to the House of Representatives, and that would, in effect, diminish the impact of voting, because now you're right back to those representatives in the House of Representatives making that decision for us. Many people say, why don't we just have a popular election? In other words, why can't we just all vote and whoever wins the popular vote, they become the president? And that's really because those smaller states, if you go back to the beginning of this PowerPoint and think about those really tiny states that has very small population, they obviously would be not representative in many ways, right? They would really, the bigger states or the more populated states would always be the people who was making the decision about who's the president. And so if you come from a small state with a small population, you want to have voice in who the president is, and the electors is meant to even out and balance out that impact, right? Because if you come from a tiny state with small population, you want to feel like your vote matters. And so the electoral college is the way to try to balance that out so that those smaller states still have an impact. And then you can just see some more of those potential problems. So why do we keep it? Again, there's not really an alternate right now that most people can live with. And then here are some of the issues of why we keep it as well. Oops, let me go back to that one for a second. And just to this is an interactive slide. I told you guys the last couple of weeks I was trying to work on my interactivity. So let me move my face over here. Oh, my face went away. Okay, well that's maybe not a bad thing. I was trying to get myself out the way. Let me get that moving again, sorry. Okay, there we go. So what I wanted you to be able to see is the dates change and then how the colors change, okay? So the colors across the middle here, you can see Republicans to Democrats. So I wanted you to be able to see how every U.S. state has voted since 1976. And so this takes all the different colors, the dates are changing. So, okay, the color, the key, or the legend across the middle there, Republicans and Democrats. Okay, so you can see the colors. And then the dates are changing at the bottom left. And so hopefully this interactive slide helps you see some of the shift and changes. I'll just give you a minute to watch that. So this only goes up to 2016. I don't want to make this a political class. I don't want to make this about the politics. Obviously, I want us to have a conversation about the impacts on our world today and our country today, but I also don't want to get into political divide. I want to spark you to do some exploration. There's certainly some changes even since 2016 in how states have voted. For example, from Georgia, and we've turned back to a blue state. And then back to red, back and forth. And so there's some things there. Georgia is one of the hotly contested states between the political parties. But again, I don't want to make this a political class. I just want to help you to understand kind of how things work and the why behind the Electoral College. So hopefully just seeing this sparks you to want to learn more. All right, so I'm going to pull this down for a second, and I'm just going to show you something real quick. So last week, what I asked you to do was identify a topic you wanted to know more about. So step 1 is going to be recall, or you can look back at your Lecture 3 assignment, the last question, what you said you wanted to know more information about. And so what you're going to do for your lecture activity for this week is some quick research, and there's 4 websites here. So I took all of your topics that you wanted to know more about, and I brought I found 4 websites that should attend to most of those questions or those topics. And I want you to just write your answer to this. What's your topic? What was one additional fact or idea that you learned from your search of these websites? Use these 4. And why does this topic matter today? How is this relevant? And I want you to use just your own words for number 3. You don't need to overcomplicate it. You don't need to use a lot of big fancy words. You don't need AI. I just want you to know why this topic. I want you to tell me why this topic matters today and how it's relevant, and use your own words. Okay, so that's going to be the activity for this week. And I will load this along with your video. All right, so I hope you guys have a great rest of the week. I'll probably drop you one more video because we're going to end the class soon. I'm going to miss you guys, so I have to at least do one more video, or at least a message to say good luck to each of you, and I hope to see you again in my classes soon. Take care.